Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Members Question and Answer. Now, today we're answering your comments and questions from our members on Frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. You know I present Times Radio Frontline, but I also commentate on all matters geopolitical, defence, security, cyber, terrorism, because my background is as a former senior British military intelligence officer. For those that are into accents, I know we've had questions about that beforehand. My accent is from a part of the world where I've got an opinion on everything. So, getting into the first points, and our first point comes from Terry. Terry, I picked this up as part of a discussion that was going on, and it's an interesting point and allows me to bring a few things out. And you say that the bizarre thing is that no nation on earth would benefit more from a regime change in Russia than Russia. Why the Russians can't see that is beyond me. That plays to the level of control that Vladimir Putin has got over his domestic audience. He's got that control because access to the outside world is completely controlled by Russia. They know who can see the World Wide Web. Russia has replicated that, but there are gateways to getting out to the outside world. So they know who can see international news. They know who can access international social media platforms and otherwise, and those are very, very carefully monitored. And for those people that can access it, their commentary is monitored, and this is where fear comes in. They fear that if they do say anything or they hint at anything, then they will be arrested, and many of them are being arrested. It doesn't mean that the first thing that they say is that it could be perceived against the Russian regime. They're taken away and thrown into a gulag somewhere in Siberia. No, they tend to be warned, first of all, by the police. If they continue to do it, then that warning will turn into something more severe, and then they can get arrested again. Of course, if there's public displays against what Russia is doing, or even suggestions it could be against what Russia is doing in Ukraine and elsewhere, then arrests happen very quickly because they don't want this coming out in public. You can't begin to imagine the level of control that there is over the general public in Russia. And the majority of Russians are not in Moscow and St. Petersburg. They're still fairly well off. They're not seeing the impact of the war. But the majority of Russians are out in the east, in lots of little towns, villages and cities, and the only information that comes into those towns, villages and cities comes from state-provided media, and therefore they're fed this diatribe of what Vladimir Putin and his regime wants them to hear. And of course, in many of the villages that are out there, literacy rates are very, very low indeed. So individuals will believe what the elders, what the educated, what others within the towns and villages are saying to them. That level of control is something that, from a Western perspective, is very difficult for us to imagine. So that's a very good point and something I'll emphasise again and again. Marty, next point comes from you. May I connect two good points Chip made, and of course you're referring to an interview I did with Major General Chip Chapman, an old friend and colleague. We've served together and on different operations on a number of occasions. Those stories, I think, still remain fairly classified. I think it's optimism bias to think that Donald Trump will truly bring Putin to the table through tough sanctions. Surely Donald still does not care about Ukraine's fate. He wants to do business with Russia. Marty, I think you've got valid points there. I think Donald Trump does want to do business with Russia because he has historically done business with Russia, and some of his business interests are tied up with Russian business interests. So he's trying to either protect those or detangle those or not do them any further damage is one of the probabilities or possibilities that's out there. The sanctions, we have to see how impactful they are. Now, the sanctions against the oil companies are impacting because we're seeing China and India and Greek shipping companies move away from the movement of Russian oil. But it seems as if there have been other mechanisms set up and in place. So maybe the timing of the sanctions, maybe things that had happened beforehand have given enough pre-warning for the Russians to get other mechanisms put in place, so it's not going to affect them hugely and allows Donald Trump to be seen to be doing something overtly. Only time will tell. It's too early. But Donald Trump's reticence to take stronger action against Vladimir Putin is something that will continue to suggest that there is more than just optimum bias potentially from Donald Trump, and the fact that Vladimir Putin knows that he can play Donald Trump and is playing him like a grandmaster. Putin is a wily old KGB officer and has been on the global geopolitical stage for an awful lot longer and has got an awful lot more experience than Donald Trump. And he's backed up by the likes of Lavrov and others who've got similar sorts of levels of experience. Donald Trump doesn't have that strong a team with that sort of level of understanding of geopolitics. So I think Putin will continue to control Donald Trump in a way that Trump doesn't seem to begin to realize. Next point comes from Torgim, and you say, thanks for the recap, Mr. Ingram. Well, thank you for watching the recap and for listening to it, and thank you for posting a question on here. Of course, to post a question, please sign up for membership, put it in there, and I will try and deal with them as we can. And you say, I've been thinking a lot about how Trump and Putin are talking about a normalization of US-Russia relationship. If Russia and Ukraine agree a ceasefire and thus freeze the contact lines where they're currently at, do you think Trump will sell the ceasefire as a peace deal to the world? And do you think he'll immediately lift all sanctions on Russia and conduct business as normal? If so, how should and could Ukraine and the rest of the world respond? Well, I think the first bit is Donald Trump would see that as a peace deal and would try and sell it because his motivation is to set himself up to get the Nobel Peace Prize. That's his ultimate goal. No matter what he says about wanting to stop wars and everything else, he wants the badge. For those that know Dastardly and Muttley, it's Muttley falling out of the sky beside Dastardly, pointing to his chest saying, gimme, 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 wanting Dastardly to give him another medal. If you don't know who Dastardly and Muttley are, go and Google them. They're really funny. But do you think he'll immediately lift sanctions on Russia and conduct business as normal? I don't think the rest of the world will let him. He might try to. He might try and ease sanctions. He might put pressure on Europe and everything else. But I think Europe is a significantly large economic bloc that it can influence when Donald Trump lifts sanctions and how those sanctions are lifted. And in reality, does America do a lot of business with Russia? Not really. Does Russia want to do a lot of business with America? It does, but it's not doing huge amounts. There's more coming out of Europe and out of the rest of the world. So something will happen, but I don't think it'll be a lifting of sanctions. But really good point. Something that we'll watch closely. Now, how could Ukraine and the rest of the West respond? I think Ukraine, if things are frozen on the contact line, provided it's not giving territory permanently to Russia, that's something that President Zelensky has said he would find acceptable if there was a path to a diplomatic solution at some stage in the future. Undefined how long that some stage is, and the rest of the West should respond by supporting Ukraine as to what they do, because this is a decision for the Ukrainian people and for President Zelensky representing them, and we should back his decisions both economically, militarily, and geopolitically. Chris, you bring out a point, and you're criticising a comment that I talked about, the Russian new Skyfall long-range nuclear-powered cruise missile. And you say, a nuclear reactor glued on the back is utterly wrong about the physics of a nuclear bomb and how nuclear reactors actually work. To start off with, such a huge error puts into question your credibility. A nuclear power reactor is not a nuclear warhead. Please study up on the facts. Chris, I've done nuclear science as part of my first degree and as part of my master's degree, and within that, nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And I was quite clear in my commentary about the missile being nuclear powered, and the only way that using a nuclear powered cruise missile, the only credible weapon that it could be is as a nuclear missile, a nuclear armed missile, so with a nuclear warhead as well. Otherwise, you turn it into a dirty bomb. Now, the nuclear power. As I say, I've studied nuclear physics, and I had to go and just check and see the physics behind there being a nuclear reactor on the back of a missile propelling it. And it's a ramjet. And a ramjet takes air in, compresses it, heats it either with burning another fuel in it, but here it's heating it with, yes, a small nuclear reactor strapped onto the back of a missile, and then it pushes that expanded air out at a higher speed, causing the propulsion. And you can keep it going for as long as that nuclear reactor is creating heat. Now, whenever you've got a nuclear reactor like that on a missile, it can't have the shielding that you'd have in a nuclear reactor in a nuclear submarine where it's powering it, or in a nuclear power station or something else. So it is going to leak a lot of nuclear energy, because it's going to have uranium or plutonium or something highly radioactive to create that level of heat in the first place. And therefore, it's going to leak nuclear ions as it is flying through the air. That is going to send a very clear, trackable signature. That measurement and signature intelligence can be used to track where the missile is at any one time. And of course, with that little nuclear reactor pulsing away with lots of heat on the back of the missile, propelling it forward, that's going to be a huge beacon to any satellite that there is in space that's looking out for nuclear hotspots, because it's going to be one. Then at the front end of the missile is the warhead. And the only way that you can use something that is nuclear powered is to use it with a nuclear warhead, because they're all going to create a big radioactive contamination whenever it goes bang at the other end. If you use a conventional warhead, if it goes bang at the other end, then you've got this little nuclear reactor that's full of fissile material, and that fissile material is going to be spread over an area and cause contamination. And that's what's called a dirty bomb. So my physics was right, my analysis was right, but you are right to question it, because I did have to go and look up and just check the physics and the credibility behind a nuclear-powered ramjet missile. So I just wanted to clear that point up. Marty, final point from you. You say Ukraine not only attacked refineries some 100 to 300 kilometers into Russia, but also some further behind the border, correct? The majority of strikes were at shorter range, though, for sure. The Ukrainians are doing a lot of shorter range strikes because they've got the majority of their UAVs, whether they be the jet-powered UAVs. I do know where they came from. I do know the range of them, but I'm not going to say that in a public domain. And they're conventionally powered UAVs that are, or propeller-powered UAVs that are attacking the refineries. But Russia's now got very long-range weapons. The longest-range missile being its new Flamingo cruise missile, and it is attacking Russian oil refineries, and not just the refineries, but the processing plants and the storage tanks, thousands of kilometers into Russia, and that is putting the majority of Russian oil refineries, Russian oil storage depots, and all the rest of it at risk. Why are they attacking the storage depots? If Russia can't refine it, if it can't export it, it has to store the oil that's coming out of the ground. If it can't store the oil that's coming out of the ground or out from under the sea, then it can't pump it out of the sea, and the oil wells have to be closed down. If the oil wells are closed down, it's virtually impossible to reopen them again. So it's causing Russia a real dilemma, but an interesting point that we will continue to monitor. So once again, thanks for watching, and thanks for posting your questions this week. Remember, if you want exclusive access to our videos, please sign up for Times Radio membership, and that allows you to put your points underneath, and the team, Louis and Laura, will pick up your questions and fire them to me to answer next week. And remember, Times Radio Frontline is now available on your favourite podcast channel. Just go into wherever it is that you listen to your podcast and search for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.